Japanese swords. Very interesting topic. Confusing, I'll give you that, but very interesting topic. Alright, I'll clear it up for you. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. So, in this video I'll do my best to make this concept of Japanese sword classification as clear as it can be. I will cover all Japanese types of swords, how to really understand and thoroughly comprehend their names. So, starting with Japanese sword names. I see a lot of confusion always in the comment section whenever I talk about the Japanese sword, and then people start complaining and arguing and perhaps start talking about things such as, no, that's not a Nodachi, it's a Odachi, it's a Uchigatana, no, it's a katana, is that a tachi, is it a kodachi, etc. There are two dramatically important elements which will help you understand the meaning of any name you will find on a Japanese sword. The first element or indication that we need to understand is the kanji, or the characters or logograms or glyphs used to write that sword's name. And often people who don't understand Japanese, they just rely on the actual translation of the term. So they look at Nodachi, they translate it as field sword, Odachi, great sword, etc. But the specific usage of these glyphs and their understanding will give us three very important indications. So, within the first element, we will find three pieces of information: the size of the sword, the shape of the sword, and the field of application. And I of course will give you lots of details and lots of examples to understand these. But the second element is the combination of the blade and its mounts, and this is dramatically important because you will have, and I'll give you some examples of these, blades that can be used for both a katana or a tachi. So and they will be identical. So it's not always the case, but there are cases like that. And the only way to actually identify one from the other is this sort of mount that it's in conjunction with, that the blade is inhabiting. But let's go back to the first element, how to understand what the kanji or the glyphs used are trying to tell us. Then we will go back to the second element and I will discuss that thoroughly. Okay, for example, let's have a look at some of these kanji used and what they mean and what these swords actually are. For example, we've got swords such as the chokuto. A chokuto is a very ancient sword. It's a pre-samurai era sword. And these are straight swords. It means straight sword. So basically it's telling us that these swords are straight because we have to remember that curved blades became popular and then universal in Japan after the 9th century. So we're talking about pretty much in the Heian period, okay? So before that, swords were straight. So chokuto are straight, as the term is telling us. But also you need to keep in mind that chokuto are straight single-edged swords. If we have a sword such as a tsurugi, and sometimes also called ken, then they are still pre-samurai era swords. So these are again straight swords, but they are double-edged. This is why often when for example, even in these Japanese role-playing games, when you use an actual knight's sword, they either use the katakana sodo or they call it tsurugi with this character because it is a double-edged straight sword. But when we go into the world of curved swords, we find this character. Now, this character alone will be read katana. So we already know that a katana is clearly a curved sword and it's single-edged. What this means is that all swords which will have this character will have these common features. They will be curved, although the amount of curvature will change. They still will be curved and they will be single-edged. Now this character can be read in many different ways, and this is why many people who don't know Japanese will get confused, because it can be read katana, it can be read gatana, particularly if it's following something like Shinogi-Gatana, the katana of a shinobi. It can be read to, like in Nihontō, a Japanese katana. It can be read chi, like in tachi. So the chi of tachi is this character, still a curved, single-edged weapon. So whenever you see this character, you already know that that sword has these common features. Now when we have a look at the word tachi, for example, well, chi, now we know what that means. Da, it's actually one of the possible readings of a kanji that is normally read in Japan as futo, with the addition of I in hiragana for the adjective futoi, which means fat, used as in fat people. But the original character is a phonosemantic compound of big, which in Mandarin Chinese is read da, and excessive. And the combination of these in Mandarin Chinese will be read tai. So in the case of swords, we should translate this as a great sword, considering the fact that the word katana, at the end of the day, does mean sword in general sense, although still being curved and single-edged. So we can say that this character is the superlative derivative of big. So now we have seen that these glyphs are telling us about the size, because, great sword, so it's bigger. They're telling us about the shape, because we know that it's curved, we know that it's single-edged, so we know more about the nature of the blade as well. And you can also appreciate how silly some comments are, because I was once insulted quite rudely, I must say, by a person who said, because I made a video where I was talking about the ninja, or shinobi no mono, and then I was saying that ninja used katana, and this person said, "You idiot," talking about me, "don't you even know that ninja use ninja-to?" Clearly this person doesn't have a clue what Japanese is and how it works, because a ninja-to, now you know that it's the katana of a ninja. That's what you're saying, you're just changing the pronunciation, but the character is the same. So clearly this person's knowledge of Japan comes directly from anime, but I am the idiot who has over a decade of Japanese academical studies at university. What can I say? So for the third direct information that we're given within the first element that we're discussing is the field of application. So two examples, Uchigatana, Nodachi. Now, a Nodachi means a field sword, or a field great sword, okay? So it's a sword that is bigger, we know it's curved, we know it's single-edged, just like we have identified by these characters, but we also know that it was used on the field. So my personal translation of this, but I think it's quite a matter of fact, is that with no, they're basically telling us that it's a battlefield weapon, as opposed to the katana, for example, which could be worn in town. An Odachi wouldn't be worn in town. You would probably carry it on the shoulder, on your back, or you would be carrying it by hand, as it was fashion, and particularly in the 14th Muromachi period, the 14th century, and it was used for that purpose. So the word no is telling us just that. I know people will ask, is there an actual difference between Odachi and Nodachi? The answer is no. I have seen people saying that there is. I could find no evidence for that. I've also read quite a few documents in Japanese, as I do read kanji, and no, it seems like that the Japanese use these two words interchangeably. Perhaps one could say that with Nodachi you're basically specifying the application of the sword, whereas with Odachi you're just saying great sword, or big great sword, or great big sword. So you're just basically talking about the size of the weapon, but at the end of the day I would say they are indeed the same weapon. Uchigatana is an interesting example. Is there an actual difference between Uchigatana and katana? Well, the answer is there is, sort of, because both words have been used for quite a long time. I would say that the difference is that you need to understand that when you say katana now, what you're meaning is either a samurai sword, okay? Most people, when you say katana, even in modern day Japanese, and to the Japanese, they will think immediately of the sword which a samurai will be wearing. But the concept of daisho, so katana plus wakizashi worn as a social symbol of the social status of the samurai class, is very much of an Edo period invention. So before, when you said katana, it meant sword, just sword. Any sword would be a katana, as we could appreciate with the fact that the character is used everywhere, basically. So at the time of Muromachi period, for example, and even beforehand, the Kamakura period, what was a samurai sword? A tachi was a samurai sword. So when you start using katana, the reason why they are called Uchigatana at first is because they are, again, specifying the field of application, meaning they are katana used for hitting people, as to distinguish them from a normal tool, because you do need to consider that they are indeed shorter and smaller normally, although we will see that there are exceptions to this. So when you call them Uchigatana, you're just specifying that it's a katana used for hitting people, whereas when you say katana, it's just a very, very general term for a curved blade. So it doesn't tell us much about its field of application, at least at the time. So now that we have all this information, why do we need more information to classify swords? Well, Swords are often classified by the length of the blade, but this is not a perfect way of classifying them. Why? Because Japanese use a unit of measurement called shaku. Now the first thing, now I'll tell you everything about shaku, but the first thing we need to understand about shaku, and which generates a lot of confusion, and it's why people argue in the comments, is because there are basically two ways to read shaku. There is the modern way, so after 1891, so basically one shaku is around 30 centimeters, and two shaku is around 60 or 60.6 centimeters. So in other terms, one shaku is roughly speaking the length of a foot, which I don't remember the amount of inches, I'm sorry, but I'm used to metric. And the idea is 33 shaku equals to approximately 10 meters. But this is modern concept of shaku. Ancient reading of measurement, or unit of measurements of shaku would be different. Not big, very different, but basically the ancient Japanese traditional shaku would be slightly longer. So one shaku would be slightly longer than a modern day Japanese shaku. So not a big difference, but there is a difference. So when you multiply that difference, of course, and you start talking about bigger measurements, then things can get confusing, and that's why people are like, no, that's not that, because it's one shaku. No, it's not one shaku, it's two shaku, it's almost two shaku. It depends which one you're using. The second problem with shaku is the following. Okay, we've got three different measurements. If you have all types of sword, if the sword is one shaku less, it's considered to be a tanto, so basically a dagger or a knife. If the sword is between one shaku to two shaku, it's considered to be a shoto, namely a short sword, such as wakizashi, but also kodachi. We'll get that to a minute. If the sword is two shaku or longer, it's considered to be a daito or a long sword. So for example, the katana would be one, but also the tachi. In fact, when Miyamoto Musashi in the Book of Five Rings talks about longsword, he's talking about the daito, so basically the katana. If the sword goes beyond 3 shaku, then we could consider it to be a Odachi or Nodachi. Now, you will immediately have noticed that there is a problem with this way of measuring swords. The fact is that the levels overlap. So if you have a 1 shaku long tanto and a 1 shaku long wakizashi, so the maximum length of the first range and the minimum length of the second range, they overlap. So if you see the blades and you don't see them mounted, you can't recognize one from the other. It's not always the case, but it will happen. And again, a kodachi can be 2 shaku long, but also a katana can be 2 shaku long. So again, you only see the blades, they might be completely identical. And this leads us to the second element that we're going to discuss today, the mount. So the type of classification of a Japanese sword indicates the combination of the blade and its mounts. A sword will be properly distinguished by the style of the mount it currently inhabits. All of this needs to be taken into the equation. So for instance, if you take a naginata, okay, the pole arm when the end has got a curved blade, if you take the blade of a naginata and you mount it on the handle or tsuka of a nagamaki, it becomes a nagamaki. And then if you take that blade away and you put it back on a pole, it becomes a naginata. So as you can see, the type of mount will determine what sort of blade, what sort of weapon we will have. Now, and this happens as well with other swords. Now, let's consider again the situation with kodachi, katana, and tachi. How do you distinguish one from the other? Now, you will see that normally a tachi will have a more curved blade. The blade will be longer, but it's not always the case. You will have situations in which you will have a blade which was meant for a tachi, but it will be mounted on a katana type of handle and tsuka and everything, and I'll give you the term now in a minute, and it will then become a katana. So when we talk about this sort of mount, we're talking about what in Japanese is called a koshirae, from the word koshiraeru, an ancient Japanese word to say, to create, to make. Now the modern Japanese use tsukuru. And it means the combination of everything within the hilt, everything with the tsuba, tsuka, everything, kashira, etc. I'm sure you've read that if you take a sword, a Japanese sword, and you wear it cutting edge up, it's a katana, but if you wear it cutting edge down, it's a tachi. But this is not 100% correct, so be careful. It's not just a matter of taking the same exact sword and then it depends how you wear it on your sash or your obi. It's part it's very important the mount, the koshirae. For instance, the differences between a koshirae of a katana and a koshirae of a tachi. A koshirae of a tachi, first of all, has got 2 pins to secure the handle or tsuka to the blade, whereas normally a katana has got only 1. Secondly, the tsuka of a tachi will be curved, and quite curved actually. So when you see an actual tachi, you will see that it has a very curved silhouette completely, whereas a katana tends to have a straight tsuka or handle and a curved blade. Thirdly, the attachment method of a koshirae for a tachi will be that basically you just have the weapon hanging with the blade facing down. So it is true that a tachi has the blade facing down, but it's the whole attachment system. A katana doesn't have that, and so the koshirae of a katana just has the katana worn in the sash, cutting edge up. Fun fact. There is also another system of mounting Japanese blades, and it's called shirasaya. Now, shirasaya means white scabbard, and is this kind of swords. Now, this sort of mounting it's historical. It did exist. Sometimes we see it in anime or cartoon or films or video games. It did exist, but this was used to preserve the sword when it was not intended for usage. So when you were not carrying the sword around, when you were not expecting to cut something with it, and when you were not expecting to bring it with you on the battlefield, then you would use a shirasaya. So a shirasaya is there to protect the sword, particularly from corrosion. Why? Because with a koshirae, so this one here, the fact that the wooden scabbard is lacquered will attract moisture, and therefore it will sort of favor corrosion. Whereas with shirasaya, these are basically storage mounts, and you can see that because it has no ito, there is nothing, no wrapping around the handle, and there is no tsuba for protection. And the sort of wood that they use will help preserve the blade for longer time. Alright, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Please let me know, what's your favorite Japanese sword? Personally, I like polearm-like Japanese swords such as the Nodachi and the Nagamaki. I do have to say that I have a similar taste as Oda Nobunaga, who really liked Nagamaki. It was his favorite sword. In fact, he even had a whole guard of Nagamaki-wielding samurai with him. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.